Welcome everybody to the first of the KDVI Learning Lab series. I'm Claire Pointing, for those of you who don't know me, and together with Graham Ward, who's another KDVI associate, we've been asked to really put together a series of discussion and reflection spaces over the next few weeks, just to give an opportunity to the KDVI community to come together and really have a space to reflect and think about what's happening in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And the idea really is to create a space for collective sense making rather than a space for pure content. And I think that's because at the moment we're in a particularly strange space and time where we're individually all touched and challenged by a whole series of events outside our control, whether it's economic, professional, personal, social, or political. But it's also a truly collective experience as well, and one that's giving rise to a number of elements that we've not seen before, and whether it's from a professional or personal point of view, we don't know how really to respond to until we have more visibility of what's happening. And I guess one question is, why have we put together a learning lab rather than a series of webinars? And this really is distinct from a webinar series. And the reason we've done this is because we've realized that within the KDVI community, we have a number of individuals who come with particular perspectives, insights, ideas that can really help the community coming together frame and make sense of the crisis as it unfolds. And the objective of the series isn't to tell people how to behave or what to do, but rather to really understand and expand our collective awareness of what's happening. So the series starts with Manfred Kets de Vries and Elizabeth Florent, and they're going to be looking at how the psychodynamic lens can be really used to help make sense of and navigate this experience that we're all going through. But they're not in charge of the content, although they think they might be, they're not. And what's going to happen over the course of the session is we are going to invite you as a group of participants to really help us steer the direction of the conversation by sharing questions and observations through the chat function. And I know that when we originally put this session together, we suggested that there would be some one-on-one discussions with Manfred and Liz, but because we've had such a big response to the number of people who want to come on the session, we can't actually manage that in an effective way. So what we're inviting you to do is come up with questions, put them in the chat function. We will look at those and we will find questions where there are common themes or questions that are so left field that we've never thought of them before. And we will be feeding them to Manfred and Liz to share their reflections on. We're going to be doing other sessions as well going forward. They're going to be a much smaller setup where we're going to have a little bit of content, but much more intimate discussion and sense making within smaller groups. And we'll be sharing the output of those sessions on the KDVI Learning Lab webpage, which is on the KDVI website. And we'll also be recording where we can key elements of these sessions. This session in particular is being recorded and that will be shared as well. Before I hand over to Manfred and Liz, just a number of small sort of etiquette points. The first is we've muted all your mics. Please stay muted. It makes sure that we don't get background noise. And for those of you who are using the speaker page rather than the participant page, so you're basically getting a picture of whoever's speaking, it will stop your page flipping to other people's video images if they make a noise. We really urge you to make use of the chat function. Your contribution is incredibly important to how we experience this session. And what we're going to find out. And so please put your questions in. Everyone's going to be able to see them on the shared function, and really whatever you want to ask. So there's something really fundamentally interesting about seeing a question where we get to think, I never thought of that before. You know, that's really interesting. So we really invite you to do that as well. And so having said all of that, I'm really delighted to hand over to Manfred and Liz to lead us through a discussion and a reflection on how psychodynamic lens can really help us begin to make sense of the unfolding COVID-19 crisis. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire, and welcome to all of you. And I thought it might be worth taking a minute to just sort of set the stage for what we're, the work we can do together. And I've been spending a few days just talking to people and saying, what are you thinking about and what's top of your mind and what are the kind of questions that come when you think about this, the idea of the world we're in now and the world of the future. And I thought it was interesting to just take a minute to recognize who we are, this group as an audience, but also the kind of the people around us and the people that we might be carrying with us or bringing into this conversation. And I was, of course, for example, talking to members of the older generation. I talked to my mother in Los Angeles, and she was saying to me, I've lived through World War, I lived through the Depression in the United States, but I've never seen anything like this. And she said, people around me are shell-shocked. That's a word she used. I think probably among our listeners or the people that are organizational leaders, top leaders, who have been drafted, it's another strong word, but drafted into a situation that they were never prepared for, and they're being required to quickly do something, anything, just do something. I've also spoken, I see a lot of you who I know well from different programs, so executives or people like ourselves, and they're asking me, the strong question that comes through to me is, why are we still doing business as usual? Where is the empathy and the humanity? What can we do that we're not doing in this situation? And then the group that sometimes we forget to think about is the next generation. So the ones who are coming into the world of work or the ones who are just finishing their studies. And many of them are saying to me, the future looks like a wasteland to us. There's no hope for us. Now, that said, there's also a group of people who are settling into this kind of reflective space. And they're saying, I've rediscovered my family. Work-life balance is flipped around, so we have more life. And they're enjoying the reflective space. Of course, they're wondering also what it would be like when they go back to the world of work. So I just wanted to sort of, because somebody said to me yesterday, is a flat screen group a group? And so I'm sitting here looking at, I don't know how many, maybe 50 pictures. And I just wanted to say, here we are as a group, the older people who have memories of the past, the younger people with fears for the future. So that's who we are today. And with that sort of scene setting or, bringing us together as an audience, I wanted to sort of turn to Manfred and say, so here we are again. Manfred, you've been, I quote one of the book jacket descriptions of you. You've been called a failed engineer, an entrepreneur manqué, reluctant economist, amateur anthropologist, and of course, an iconoclastic psychoanalyst. But above all, you've always been an observer of people and things, and you seek to make sense of what you see. You, of course, have witnessed quite a few global crises. Probably maybe one of your earliest memories was as a child when you saw some possibly frightening, intriguing events happening on your grandparents' farm. But I think what I'd like to do is start with that, the broader and more historical perspective of what's happening in the world today. And so I want to say to you, we know that the COVID-19 crisis is, we're now all aware, it's probably the most serious thing that's happened in the world in living memory for many of us. But as a psychoanalyst and an economist, Manfred, how do you place this current coronavirus COVID-19 event in the context of history?
Now, you already, thanks. First, I want to say hello to many people's faces I saw for a second and haven't seen for a long time. It's nice to see all of you. I'm here somewhere on top of a mountain and observing the local roebuck, wild boar, and this morning a fox and an owl, so not much people observation this time because I'm quite isolated. Coming back to Liz's comment, I think she made already the observation, actually, that sounds terrible. The coronavirus is also a great opportunity. And of course, you can react differently to this opportunity. One is the opportunity for some kind of forced self-reflection, although some people might go into manic overdrive, typical manic defense. Other people might get depressed. But looking at the world we are in more in more general context, I remember reading in 1962, it's a few years ago, the book Silent Spring by Carson. And it was an indictment of pesticides. It had an enormous impact, even though the chemical companies were making many negative comments about her. But she had enormous. It was the beginning of the movement thinking about the Earth as not an endless entity, that it was an endless resource. Then 2 years later, I saw the film Dr. Strangelove, which is a real tragicomedy. In a way, it's Peter Sellers plays a number of different roles. It's quite funny, but it's not funny. Because at that time, it was only a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the nuclear threat was very strong, and that's still there. I mean, when you think about the number of countries which have nuclear bombs, and some of them are not very stable states, it's a scary thing. And at the time, there was also such thing instituted as a doomsday clock. Some of you might know about it. It's monitored by a number of eminent people, like the ex-Secretary General, I believe, from the United Nations is one of them. I think a Prime Minister of New Zealand, I think, is ex-Prime Minister. And they basically, the doomsday clock goes to midnight. And unfortunately, they used to count in minutes. Now they're going to in seconds. It's 100 seconds from midnight. The third thing I want to mention, apart from Dr. Strangelove, is also coming back to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which comes actually from the New Testament, is the book by a Frenchman, Piketty, about the inequality, the kind of 10%. Yesterday I heard that Mr. Bezos is now worth $168 billion. It's in a way scary. And of course that's also a prescription for social unrest. And of course social unrest coming back to the more clinical point of psychodynamic point of view. People regress, look for messiahs to save them, and the messiahs, unfortunately, there are very few philosopher kings in this world, to quote Marcus Aurelius, and very often the inner autocrat comes out, and so we have a lot of forces coming together. And I just wrote a little article about trying to develop some scenarios post-coronavirus. There will be an antidote will be found eventually. But in the meantime, from a macro perspective, a meso perspective, and a micro perspective, is there anything we can do? And of course, you have seen, which is a great disappointment to me, that the European community, they have been not doing much as a community. They have been circling the wagons by nations. Other countries have done the same. And Trump yesterday decided no longer to finance the World Health Organization. It's not perfect, the organization, but I mean, you need global organizations to do something about that. Because when you have a more sociopathic leadership, always look for scapegoats. Paranoia is a part of the deal. I always have said in some of my writing, paranoia is a disease of kings. And so all the things together, it's a question of, is it an impossible task? I don't know if you know something about what's it called, the tragedy of the commons. Have you heard of that, Liz? The tragedy of the commons. I mean, it's. I have a neighbor, not a neighbor. I know this person, and he lives on the street, which is a fantastic, beautiful street with beautiful houses. But to get there, you need a four-wheel drive because the road is owned by all the houses and they can't get their act together. And that's also what you have been seeing in the world, that if I don't catch the last fish, somebody else will catch the last fish.
Say more about the tragedy of the commons.
No, I mean that there's, we have, coming back to the kind of selfish motives people have, the greed factor and all this kind of stuff.
So that was a question that I wanted to follow up or to ask you was, why do you think this event, this pandemic is happening now? Because the things that you've been, we've talked about the historical perspective, but is there something about the present time, or is it just a coincidence? Why is this happening now?
I mean,
other than the virus that got out of control, but I mean in terms of society.
you can of course look at conspiracy theories that
No.
biological warfare, and that it was it really the market in Hunan, or was it some kind of military operation be doing something and making a mistake? Because I don't think it necessarily done deliberately, but people make mistakes. Because there has been SARS before and the Ebola, so I mean every epidemiologist had a sense that something like this could happen. Of course, nobody prepared because it was beyond the imagination.
Well, as we know, we can also say that some of the institutional structures, political and organizational structures that we needed to have in place in order to manage this kind of event have been dismantled.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at international organizations, United Nations, I mean, this is when you talk about the Earth as a kind of fixed commodity, we have been very busily destroying it. Now, I think when you take a more psychodynamic point of view, if it's something is so scary, you deny it. And so you see, and unfortunately, I've written quite a number of articles on the most powerful person in the world. If you would be the most powerful person in the world in the Banana Republic, fine. But at the moment, you can at least vote. The whole world is affected by some of his behavior. He's a terrible role model. And so many people, he can get away with it in many ways. And so, and what you get is, I guess it's also to do with cult formation. When people get very helpless, they also identify this concept. Identification is the aggressor. They feel so powerless that they want to absorb some of the power of a magician who promises what the people want to hear.
And let me jump on that, because one of the questions that I've been thinking about is, what is the role of media in all of this idea of identification with the aggressor? We hear a lot about fake news, we hear about mainstream media. Again, from the, if you think about the collective unconscious, what can you say about media?
Let me not go to the collective unconscious. That might be too much of a demonic exercise. But I mean, we are living still in a democracy, and a democracy needs strong institutions. And you can see that democracy is a very delicate flower. It doesn't take very much to get unstable. And you see that also, for example, in the European community, where certain countries, I mean, Hungary being the great example, where one person, and I've been writing quite a bit about it. I once wrote a book of fairy tales, and I made, remember that I was trying to get a sense of the class I taught at the time. That was called CCC at the time, Consulting and Coaching for Change. You know that program very well. And I think one of the things is that most executives, most leaders don't know themselves. And I guess what I have been trying to do in my work, and hopefully many people do the same, is that people get a sense of their strengths and weaknesses. Leadership really is a team sport, even though it doesn't look like it when you look at the remuneration systems of CEOs, which is completely out of line. So one of the things is that the old statement at the Temple of Apollo, know thyself, is still very valid. And we can be very helpful as more psychodynamic, systemic people to give them some sense of it. The second thing, of course, has to do with the famous Greek word hubris. It doesn't take very much for people to go off the deep end. And that the problem has to do again, and then the word transference comes into the picture, the idealizing transference, identification with the aggressor. And you can see, for example, in Trump, the formula for success. You only tell him how great he is, otherwise you get fired. It's a very simple recipe. Prescription is not very difficult. But so if everybody tells you how great you are, you start to believe it, and after a while you are in the echo chamber. So the hubris factor is also. The other thing which, I run this seminar for, I did this year for the 29th year, must be the longest run seminar in my CEO recycling seminar. And what people realize after the first module in the seminar is that they don't know the people they work with. They have no sense of them. They think they have a sense of them. So the first thing they very often do after the first module is to try to have a meaningful conversation with them. And very often, I think, executives, they don't get the best out of people. I mean, look at Trump again, take him as a role model, haha. The people who are willing to work for Trump have to really compromise their values. The third one has to do with teams. And I have made a comment that most particular top executive teams are dysfunctional. They don't work. And I think in that respect, when I think about my small contribution to INSEAD and also to KDVI, I think we are second to none in team coaching. I mean, I've seen it all the time. I get quite upset about it when I look at organizations who spend tens of millions of dollars or more on systems, IT systems, but their team is not aligned. And that costs even more money when they are, I mean, I always say, give me somewhat neurotic team, not psychotic team. I've had those also, and I can make something out of it in a few days. And I think many of the people at KDVI and many of my students in general have learned how to work with teams. And then, of course, there is the culture. I mean, let's face it, if you are a leader of an organization, I mean, your main task is talent and culture management. That's, I think, the main task. And most, I mean, the Gallup poll, I remember looking at the last figures of the Gallup poll, 30% of the people worldwide feels engaged. That's a terrible figure, 30%. So they go to work, and I mean, they spend so much time at work and they're not engaged. They go through the motions, measuring out your life in coffee spoons.
Right.
How to quote a well-known poet, Eliot, how to stimulate people, how to get the best out of them. And again, I think that's where, I've written about something called, which is a terrible word actually, the authentizotic organization, which is, as you might remember, because you have read some of it, it's a mixture of authentikos and zotikos, two Greek words, which means basically, in a very simplistic way, organizations where you feel alive. And to me, the sign of an organization that feels alive is always, do you want your children, your friends to work there? And I think very often people say, no, it's not a place to be. And for that, and coming back to a person who has quite influenced my thinking, apart from Freud, of course, and Jung, is also, and Erikson, is Yalom. I felt and always admired his way of presenting complex ideas in the form of novels. What are some of the many existential things you have to deal with? And I mean, and also you have Viktor Frankl, who wrote this book, Men in Search of Meaning. We're looking for meaning because we have this cloud of death hanging over us.
So let me jump in, Manfred, because I think probably it's quite rich what you've been saying, and I think there are probably a lot of questions. People might have missed something, or they might want more detail about what you've been saying. So at this point, let's if that's all right with you, Manfred, we'll pause, not pause, but we'll open it up to some questions or some reactions to this sort of Act 1 or big overview of the dilemma and the challenge that we face. I think Claire is going to be putting forward the questions, is that right?
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look at the questions that are coming in. If you just give me just one moment. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's an interesting question that's come in, which I think they're linked to a certain extent. And it's really sort of looking at the issue around the relationship between anxiety and death and authentizotic organizations. So if you're having organizations that are going to be focused on being places which are healthy organizations, and yet you're surrounded by death, does that exacerbate the anxiety, or does it create an additional focus for leaders to really start to build organizations that are healthy, as a way of containing that anxiety. And so a number of questions have come in which are around, is the anxiety we experience due to COVID-19, or is it actually due to a lack of leadership? And a similar question is, the anxiety we experience, is it related to the existential fear of death? So I think there's something kind of interesting coming through on the points that you just made, Liz, there.
Now, before the coronavirus, I mean, I'm supposed to be the professor of leadership at INSEAD, and I certainly didn't have any feelings. I mean, certainly that's the reason I've been so irritated, and I have a large group of supporters about this kind of sociopathic buffoon, or maybe the better description is a malignant narcissist who is the most powerful person in the world and sets a terrible example to the next generation and things like that. So that's now. So and certainly that creates a lot of anxiety about the future of the world, particularly when he is a major climate denier, and also tried to also break up some of the nuclear accords and other things. If you want to have I was referring to Yalom and the existential philosophers and psychologists. I try to develop for myself a scheme, which you have a kind of, in the center you would have this sense of meaning, which is really reaction to our unfortunate presence of our frontal lobes, which means that we can plan ahead and we know we're going to die. And that is something which we try to push away all the time in various ways. So to create a sense of meaning, I guess I just wrote a book which is not out yet about, which I called Quo Vadis. It's not a very original title, but it has to really do with human search for meaning. One is purpose, to find a kind of purpose which gives you some meaning. And it can be very trivial, actually. It doesn't have to be that you want to change the world major way. The other one has to do with a sense of belonging, which at the moment is difficult because we are programmed from evolutionary psychology point of view as social animals, and the moment we isolating ourselves. And some people have a very hard time dealing with it. Some, of course, situations are different depending on your, particularly your financial background. Do you have space? What about the children? All those kinds of things, which can you set boundaries? I actually wrote a little article called The Cabin Fever Syndrome, in which you give some maybe trite advice. By the way, that one of the trite advice is maintain social contact.
Also, Manfred, you in the other article, Coping with Lockdown, you also begin that article by talking about death and how death has come closer even into your own garden, in a sense, in this particular situation.
Now, death is always coming closer because the older you get, the closer it gets. Come on, so that's...
Yes, but I mean, in this particular context, in this context that we're in today, and...
I mean, the reaction usually is, as I said, what do you do when you... in this kind of situation? One is that you get depressed, and there are quite a few people who get depressed. And then you have also, and so you will have an increase in suicide and other situations. And then you also have the element of maybe say anger in and anger out. Anger out has to do with when you know the hotline in, I saw some statistics in the UK is moving up as far as wife beating is concerned, and that kind of the violence in the household. So those are some of the reactions to this cabin fever.
I see a lot more questions coming in. I wonder if Claire wants to jump in with another theme or continue on, just to be sure that we get a hearing from as many people as possible.
Yeah, so a lot of the questions are sort of looking either at sort of paradox of trying to hold on to the past and business as usual at a time when actually, and is that some kind of retreat or defense versus the ability to tolerate not knowing. And one question.
That, by the way, very interesting observation. That's the element when I would ask you, what happens to the holes when the cheese is eaten? How would you answer that?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting. Sorry, say that again.
No, I'm saying that it's a very famous cone which is what happens to the holes after you eat the cheese? And so, you know, it's not, it's what Bertolt Brecht who said so, but it's not deliberately. I don't think he knew the word cone necessarily, but one of the famous cone is, you know, the sound of one hand clapping. Now, what you said is very important, the sense of negative capability, not knowing, and tolerating the ambiguity of not knowing. That's actually the whole purpose of a cone, which was a relationship between a Zen master and his pupil, that they would give him some cone, and they had to not just give a flippant answer, but think about it. What does the cone do to you? In a way, it's very similar to the work of a coach, particularly psychodynamic coach, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, and did this kind of thing. But the ability to hold not knowing, and that's, of course, that word negative capability comes from Keats, which he was referring to creative people, to tolerate the ambiguity. Now, we are in that situation. And as I said earlier, it could be an opportunity for saying to ourselves, is this the world we want to live in? And I was referring in the beginning, in my opening statement, about, you know, the Dr. Strangelove phenomenon, the Earth phenomenon, and of course the incredible increase of billionaires. So the discrepancy in income, which is a prescription for social unrest. So can we do something? Can we do something about this world? And then we look at the moment at the kind of dismal leadership. So certainly, whatever I have been teaching my students certainly had no ripple effect, because when you look at the kind of terrible leadership present, and this, you know, it's easy to be a leader in good times. These are the times, and unfortunately, as once was a study done about American presidents, and if you want to be remembered as American president, you need to win a war or be murdered. That is apparently the prescription for success in the long run, have a long run, have a legacy. Now, what you see in many countries, even though you might have some dismal leadership, you see an increase in popularity. It will not last. It's an increase in popularity, which of course you can wonder what effect. Again, we have no vote. What it will that be a re-election of Mr. Trump, who is breaking down, and coming back to the comment made, which I didn't answer, of Elizabeth, about the issue of how to defend the democracy. And you need countervailing powers, which are institutions, strong institutions, and also the media. The media, and you know, the media. You know, at the moment you see also lots of factoids, which are becoming more and more popular, coming into the picture. But I mean, coming back from a macro point of view, this is a situation you can have lots of regression and paranoia, and you have to, as opposed to you know, and paranoia comes with splitting and scapegoating. So the Chinese are to blame. I mean, they are to blame, and whatever. Everybody is to blame. Not me. It's kind of the simplest defense mechanism, which are splitting, denial, projection.
And Manfred, if I could maybe ask you to sort of start at the beginning of that train of thought, to say that I think you've said in the past that when we're in a time of crisis and danger, followers in particular tend to regress into a kind of more of a primitive kind of behavior pattern. And you've mentioned identification with the aggressor and so on. If you could maybe give us a little bit more of a fine-grained definition of what's happening between followers and leaders, because I think it's important for leaders to understand how they may inadvertently provoke these types of behaviors. And it's important for followers to be aware of this so that they don't fall into that trap. So can you tell us a little bit more specifically what you mean by regression in the case of times of crisis?
You know, I have some similarities with Freud, who said the only thing you can do is to change neurotic misery in common human suffering, which is a real optimistic statement. And I think the sirens of regression are very strong, and not the sirens of saying, you know, we are becoming more mature individuals. This is a great opportunity. And the sirens of regression on the part of leaders also strong. It's an interactive process. So as I said before, which is one of the danger of actually excessive narcissism is killing the world. Do you make that dramatic statement? And that's really.
But isn't this regression a form of comfort seeking for everyone? Because the followers turn to the leaders for advice, for protection, for comfort. And the leaders are then, you know, receiving a lot of admiration and attention from the followers.
And that's what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
So this kind of idealizing transference, they start to believe they are this great. I mean, everybody says you're so great. Of course, if you not give flattery to the person, you get fired. And you see it actually, it's a very interesting educational process at the moment, because you see it in the most extreme form in America. And I mean, you know, the vice president, anything he says, he has to give some flattery to, you know, Trump is the greatest, the greatest, the greatest. He has to say it all the time. The mantra, he probably wakes up in the morning. I wonder what he really thinks sometimes, but that's another story. But, you know, people are very easy to compromise themselves to the sirens of power and the sirens of greed. We talked about greed also earlier, which is coming back also, the tragedy of the commons, which has to do with the greed factor. So, and then of course, because you feel helpless, you have your fantasies, you have the wish to believe. It's like a kind of dreamlike state, and you identify as, he must be the all-powerful person, he was taking care of us. And unfortunately, the language used by some of the present individuals is very reminiscent of what Hitler and Stalin were doing too. I mean, if you look at, coming back to communication, when you look at Triumph of the Will, the famous film of, I mean, very worthwhile seeing, of Leni Riefenstahl as a counter, I mean, and the symbolism of it all is spectacular. I mean, actually a small group of people who eventually was able to terrorize everybody else. And so then we also have a fantastic capacity on rationalization and compartmentalization. Think about, you're running a drug ring and a bunch of prostitution ring. In the meantime, you talk about family values. You compartmentalize things, and mind is fantastic. We can do fantastic things. So,
For some of these, they could also be characterized as defenses.
Yeah, those are defenses. They are. That's what they are. But you know, the ability. I think it was Jung who talked all the time. It's so interesting. Freud talked about the id. I never used that word, by the way, which is supposed to be the basement of a building, and where all those dark and unpleasant things are dancing around. While Jung was more constructive, I thought he didn't talk about the basement so much. You come back to your collective unconscious. There were lots of good things there too. So I think one of the things is the ability, and I've written a little bit about that, about to accept, you know, I had as a teacher when I was much younger at Harvard, Erik Erikson, and he was the man of identity. That was a big issue for him, but also personal, I think, at the time. He changed his name a little bit, I guess. It was okay, interesting part of it. But negative identity. And so, you know, you have this uncle who said, don't become like your uncle, you know, the black sheep of the company, of the family. Slip here. But it's also very attractive. And I think the acceptance that we're not perfect human beings, I think to come in touch with this darker side and try to integrate it is not such a bad idea. There might be a lot of wisdom in that too. That's what the comparison between Freud and Jung. I mean, for Freud, it was demons. There were all these terrible things happening there, this in the unconscious. Well, Jung was much more optimistic and had more, there was also a lot of wisdom there.
So let's, we've got lots of questions coming in. Let's play a game, Manfred.
I've not looked at them, I must say.
Let's play a game. This is a challenge for you. Claire will ask you a question and see if you can answer it with a cone.
Certainly not. I'm not going to do that.
Well, let Claire have some. Ask some more questions.
1700, and I'm not a specialist in cones, but I like the cones about the. I mean, there are some cones like, what do you prefer, red or white? And then you can say red, white, or 7. And said, but 7 is not a color, and so there. But that's not the point. You have to think about. It's you know, it's a kind of moral tale. So
let's see if Claire has some questions that are some themes that can be addressed that way.
So one of the themes that's really starting to come out in the questions is a desire to look forward and to really ask, and they're coming out in questions such as, is the psychological contract going to change between organisations and people who work with them within society as well? What is the best way for leaders to invite their followers to head back to the new normal, whatever that will be? So again, how are leaders going to have to adjust their behaviours, or what can they take and learn from this? And then what kind of leaders are we going to need, or are we going to end up with? We might not need them, but we might end up with, as we navigate our way out of this.
Well, let me start with this last one. This is the easiest one for me, to some extent. Now, I've written on, there was, McKinsey had talked about, at one point in time, there was this best-selling work about the art of Japanese management. And there they had the 7 S's. I have the 7 C's to make things simple. I mean, people like acronyms to remember things. And I think when you talk the leaders we need, my feeling is in the first place, they need to have a sense of complexity of the world. They need to be system thinkers and not just being plainly reactive. And that means also that they have to manage for the long run. And that is very difficult when you're a politician, particularly. And unfortunately, when you talk about organizations, the way the stock market works, it's also managing for the short run. That's the reason family businesses can do better in many ways, because they don't have that pressure, the continuous pressure of the share price. And of course, CEOs play it, when you think about all the stock buybacks and things like that to manipulate the share price, but not investing in R&D and things like that. And not taking care of the environment, coming back to the tragedy of the commons. So the ability to see things on a systemic way, I think it is very important. And you can see again that when you look about the preparedness of the many countries, and particularly the United States, the UK, and talk about the developed world, how there was such a lack of preparedness. I mean, of course, the UK was so busy with their crazy situation of screwing the younger generation, this is Brexit, and Great Britannia rules the waves. And that was, it's nostalgia for the past, but anyhow, let's not go there. So complexity is one thing. The other C has to do with a certain amount of confidence. I mean, when you have very insecure leaders, they start to behave, narcissism, excessive, we all need to be somewhat narcissistic. But when you feel very vulnerable, which has to do with when you look at children's background, I wrote too much about it. I talk about constructive and destructive narcissism. It's to do with overstimulation, understimulation, inconsistent stimulation. So, and you can wonder, we have now one person you use as a kind of stooge, whatever you might call it, Trump, about the way he was educated, what was happening there. So his lack of self-confidence needs that he continuously needs to be praised. So confidence. The other one is compassion. That is again, you see some different leaders talking about the coronavirus. And when you look at the mechanical way, Trump has been dealing with that when his daily television performances. There is a very lack. You're a psychopath. You have no empathy. Let's face it. So the lack of compassion. It's. I remember I sometimes would ask people, why you work in this organization, and this is this kind of gulag. And he said, I like my boss because when I had difficulties, my boss cared to show. You can talk about emotional intelligence, whatever, but the element of compassion and care that's related to that, those kind of things. Another C. And then courage. Making tough decisions at times. The ability to, the resilience that comes with it, courage. I also included in my 7 C's the critical thinking, which also means, and then I think Liz touched upon that you not get seduced by the sirens of flattery. Was, I think, an American politician, Stevenson, who said, flattery is all right as long as you don't inhale. And fortunately, it's so easy to inhale. I mean, that's coming back, as I said earlier, excessive narcissism destroys the world. And the final thing, coming back also to the whole issue of communication. I mean, in times like this, I remember once writing years ago an article about downsizing. And when you have to downsize or rationalizing or restructuring, as a CEO, you feel embarrassed actually because you have to let people go. And so the natural tendency is to hide. That is just what you should not do. So in these situations, it's very important to over-communicate, to have regular sessions with your people, because to also show that you care, not just for that we're all in the same boat. I mean, everybody's in the same boat. I think in that respect, leaders have to be somewhat of containers. You know, they talk about containment. They have to be somewhat of garbage cans, to use that. I mean, that's every coach, every psychotherapist is to some extent a garbage can, and that's probably the reason it's very hard to be all the time. That's the reason coaches are being needed, because you need to talk to somebody. You cannot take all the garbage at the same time. You'd like to dump it somewhere else. That's, I think, Liz made a lot of noise, and for the right reasons, about supervision. When you talk about coaches and supervision, that they, you know, it's good to talk about certain knotty issues and how you get stuck. And coming back to your comment, Claire, about negative capability. I mean, I sit in my class with my 21 CEO types. They make a presentation, and there's some expectations. I'm supposed to be the facilitator in class, although I have my colleague there too, but I'm supposed to run it. And I have not the faintest idea what's going on. And I suppose, I mean, a lot of kind of unconscious pressures on me to find some answers. And that, again, but I know if I can contain my anxiety, contain my, you know, the kind of ambiguity of the situation, something will happen. And something maybe more creative will happen than coming with some flippant answers. So that's this element we have to work. Not knowing is the ability to tolerate not knowing is very important. And of course also and I didn't put on the, but partially probably on care, that you, as a leader, that you can be vulnerable. The element of vulnerability, it's actually, you have to be very strong and courageous to be vulnerable, to be able to say.
I jump on that, Manfred, because I know you've said about the challenge of leadership group in the past, when they say to you, someone says, I can't do it because of this or that. And you often say to them, that's a particularly high level group, but you often say to them, if not you, then who? So sometimes I think you say to people, but you are the leader. And I linked that to I don't have the quote right in front of me, but you quoted Viktor Frankl, who said, sometimes if you can't change the world, you have to change yourself.
You have to, I mean, people come and say, complain about all different people, and said, those people are not there. I mean, I have used very often the analogy of the sea stars. Yes, you know that one of, there I am walking on the beach, a storm has been there, and there are thousands of sea stars on the beach, and there's a young lady standing at the edge of the water, taking one sea star after the other, throwing it back. And I tell her, what are you doing? There are too many of them. You can make a difference. And she said, it makes a difference to this one. And that is particular, I think, at this point in time, what we, in the situation we're in, and talk about macro level now, what the countries should think of also. I mean, what I felt when you think about, you know, the period I lived, one very important thing was done by America, which was the Marshall Plan, which was visionary. It really, instead of asking for repayments or whatever what happened in the First World War, and which ended up with the Second World War, they said, what can we do? What can make it a sum situation, not a zero-sum situation? What can we do to be generous and to stimulate everybody? And unfortunately, the European community at the moment has not really risen to that. But it has to be done everywhere to do that kind of thing. And it looks like a formula challenge. And I wrote a paper very recently about 2 scenarios after the pandemic, because I probably will take I don't know, a year or so, maybe it gets quicker, that we find, and before that it will stay some kind of a mess. One is a pessimistic scenario, that we go back, plus ça change, plus la même chose. And it is, that is a very likely scenario, because people very quickly forget, they don't want to think about it. This has happened, never again. The other scenario is that, this was, as I said before, this might be the opportunity for an inflection point, and say, listen, we can have a different world. We're all in the same world. Let's do something about it. But it's not so easy. It has to do also with education. And there is also the women's issue is an important one. Even though in the developed world, I think women have become now better educated than men. In the developing countries, you have been beating that drum for a long time, Liz, but there's an enormous amount of discrimination. And education is a very important thing. So you can also, as a voter, you can making some, talk about democracy, wise choices, because and not being swept away.
So what's coming through is the power of the collective, probably also to make us all feel a bit more courageous. We can act together. Yes, Claire, please.
So one thing that I've been, and so this isn't from the question list, but this is something I've been thinking about, is whether from this collective experience, we're also going to end up with the opportunity for collective clarity as well. And whether that is something which can be hijacked by a sort of a distributed media, but also gives an opportunity for a moment of truth, which transcends sort of politics.
Claire, I'm all for it. I was trying to talk earlier about what makes for what I talked about, the authentic organization, also feeling well in your skin. And it has to do with a number of things. I said, I started with a sense of purpose, and then it's talked about sense of belonging, which is important, that we're part of the human race, but also things like a sense of control, that you feel you have voice, coming back also to democracy, that you feel you have voice, and a sense of competence, that what you're doing, I sometimes make the joke, there's something about cutting wood, you see immediate results, but you might be the best woodcutter in the world. But there's another thing which has to do with sense of transcendence. And we can talk about the altruistic motive, but altruism, and people don't realize, is good for you. When you do things beyond your pure selfish interest, it also makes you feel better. It's good for your mental health. And one of the recommendations I gave in this cabin fever short paper I wrote was also the power of gratitude, which I've discovered. Many people, I guess I'm not the youngest anymore, have asked how we're doing here, what's going on. And also I have reached out, and those are very powerful things in that respect. But there is an element of the pacifistic nature of man. Freud had a correspondence with Einstein. That was, he had some children, I think as his son at least, was a soldier. And so they wrote a little article, Why War? It was a correspondence. And there is an element, and after that, there was also I think it was after that, he wrote The Future of an Illusion and Civilization Discontent. And Civilization and Discontent, he worked on the work of a man called Le Bon about group behavior. And the thing is, we so quickly fall back in the old regressive patterns. So how can we really utilize this momentum, which is now, it gives us a break from the normal things we're doing. And that was my optimistic scenario, take advantage of it. It also means the revitalization of international institutions, because when you look at the United Nations, it's so perverted. But then you think, I have been involved in quite some reorganizations, and you know that 70% of organizational change process fail. And here I hope, and that's one of the elements of maybe some of the talent of the people at KDVI, that they are probably better Sherlock Holmes. When I was a student at Harvard, there was a lot of emphasis in the organizational behavior department structure and strategy, structure, in particular structures. And structure is relatively easy. But what we know is that the most difficult thing is to change the mindset. And see, I think we can do that. But I don't think, I have been rarely asked by a political group to, it would be nice to take a cabinet and say, okay, I have given it a try, by the way. I almost went there to a cabinet of a country and say, how can we make it really functioning? That they really go beyond personal interest. I mean, they're really going, that it's much more deeply centered, but it's usually that's not the case.
Let's see if we can pick up, there might be a couple more questions that we can pick up along this theme from Claire.
So I think questions coming in now are, I think because there's such a lot of complexity and so many sort of different threads that the virus and the response to the virus has triggered, I think, and I suspect that as a group, we're falling into a defense as well, which is, I think there's a sense of a desire for meaning making as well. How can we make meaning out of what we're seeing at the moment? Or in fact, should we even be trying? And it comes back to this ability to tolerate sort of complexity and different approaches. But I think there is something around that yearning for an understanding of where this might be taking us. And one of the themes that's coming up on the questions are people are talking about the new normal, which I think is a very interesting idea, because how do we know when we've got to the new normal, left the old normal behind? And are we in a transitional normal at the moment, which is inherently lacking in clear meaning?
But I mean, a new normal, I mean, when you look at, when I look at the younger generation, how they communicate, and again, I have been somewhat concerned about it, written a little bit about it. You know, it's a typical scene is at a restaurant with some children. The children are playing with their iPad, the parents looking at their iPad, and there's no conversation going on. So when you talk about social isolation, to some extent, it was already there. And that's not a normal. I mean, because again, we need more face-to-face interaction, and I don't know. And the sad thing is that one thing that will be the new normal is that there will be a greater amount of virtuality. Now, it has some positive things. I mean, I think about when I go to Fontainebleau from Paris, I see this enormous line of cars coming in. And so people probably sitting in the traffic jam for an hour and a half, polluting the environment. So we have seen a kind of a positive effect there, also less car accidents and things like that. So but we'll have more obvious things like greater virtuality and things like that. But will we have more meaning? Social distances will be in place for a long time until we have an antidote. So, so I don't know about this new normal, how positive it is. And will be probably, people have some second thoughts about supply chains and things like that, which, I mean, here in France, to get a face mask is impossible. It's because they're all made in other countries and we can get them, so we have to put a scarf on or whatever you want to do. So there will be something there. But the element which is more important is, I think, coming back to the finiteness of the planet. Also the distribution of income, which has become perverted. The salary scales of the leaders, which have been only going up and up and up and up. I mean, is a person worth 400 times the salary of the average worker? It's ridiculous. I can see that, I mean, if you're an entrepreneurial person, that you deserve an extra part, but even then you can, I mean, when you are a Bezos with $168 billion worth, can't you make better living conditions for those, the companies he's running? He could, but he probably is spending his money on building rockets, because for a personal hobby, which is an expensive hobby probably. But I'm trying, so in that respect, I feel that Bill Gates has a much more, coming back to the altruistic motive. So I'm trying to disseminate a little bit of a pessimism of the nature of man. How quickly can we change? That's what I'm, and that's, and then coming back to the sea star analogy, we can at least do something ourselves in our work. The people are here. I mean, how many people are there? 85 people are on the chat. They can make their small contribution. I mean, it's my fantasy, for example, in my CEO seminar, the 21 people might be responsible for 100,000 people. So if I make them a little bit more humane and a little more reflective, who knows? So we need more reflective practitioners, use that term, which is not mine really, but reflective leaders.
Let me jump on that comment, Manfred, because I remember in one group coaching session I had, we were talking about we should become reflective leaders, it's important, and so on. And I'll never forget, one senior executive said to me in the confidence of the group coaching meeting, he said, Liz, I can plan for reflective time, but then I sit in my office and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to reflect. I don't even know where to start. And so, Manfred, if you had that person in front of you who was saying to you in confidence, tell me where to begin.
You didn't say I can help you. Have to practice this a little bit. I mean, that's an easy thing. You can give the person some homework. Come on.
All right, give them, what would the homework be? What's the homework?
To basically, maybe one thing could be the first day to spend 15 minutes doing nothing. Just forcing yourself to do nothing. Sitting there, do nothing. You know, thinking about your breathing maybe, you know, coming back to mindfulness, but doing nothing. It might be a good exercise to practice that. And then you can also talk after that. You can go back to the gentleman, also gentleman. And by the way, I think that women, that sounds terrible, Lisa, to say that, but women in general make better leaders because they don't have so much testosterone going on. They're less narcissistic. That has been my slogan all along. So
maybe so, maybe not. But I think people do have. They ask themselves. It sounds great, Manfred. Let's all be reflective, and the world would be a better place. But I actually don't know where to begin.
Yeah, you have to give him some homework and see how that works out. Mm-hmm. See, you don't know. I mean, you have to explain to them the difference between working hard and working smart. And many executives work. I mean, I'm sometimes making a 2x2 drawing, which is, you know, as far as I can go, because my lack of complexity, and which I put on one side, like, don't like, and also important, not important. So then you have don't like, not important. Now, too many executives are busily in that particular squadron. It's a total waste of time. They should. Then you have like, but not important. So I've written a few things about doing nothing. In Dutch, it's called niksen. It's an expression. It's a verb, niksen. It's very good. I mean, I've written too many things probably, but I don't write them necessarily behind my desk. I write them walking around, looking at the fox in the garden or so, or the owl, and think in my mind, but your mind is still working. So go play golf, go swimming, do something else, but when you keep on, you're not very productive. You have to really figure out, when am I most productive? You know, your biorhythm. We have different biorhythms. Some people are larks, they're good in the morning, or people are owls. Then you have important but don't like. Don't go there. Don't go there. Find somebody else. Hand it over. And then, of course, where you can really make a contribution is like and important. And so, I mean, and so what you have to tell the person, which I tell people in general, what gives you energy? When you look at a week, look at the things that give you energy. I mean, there's this element of flow. And I used to, I haven't done it for a while, salmon fishing. Once remember I was in Norway. So there's always light. So I was beating the water, fly fishing, beating the water. The salmon was there. I saw the salmon sometimes rise, and I was beating. And suddenly, I think 24 hours had passed. I had no sense of time. So figure out, while this person is doing deep breathing, maybe too much to ask. You can do one thing at a time. But also really start a diary. Actually, to have a diary is very good for your mental health because other parts of the brain get at work. Also, it's good writing about things when you have some traumatic experience. This is an ideal time to start a diary. I mean, maybe I'm almost started a diary, but I've been writing like crazy the last period. One thing after the other. It's just a way of trying to structure things in my mind. But it's a good idea to have a diary. So those kinds of activities to become more reflective. This person, because we very quickly, the manic defense is an antidepressant. Because and that's of course a big thing for many people because they need structure. Look at people who retire. I mean, retirement is also a crazy idea. Are you going to play every day in the garden, cut the roses or something like that? Many people go bananas. I've seen too many, particularly senior executives, go totally bananas. They retired, right? They go on a few boards. Fine, it's not the same. So you should be very careful about, diversify your interests and things like that. But that's a real problem at the moment because people have a lack of structure. It means, by the way, again, if you are a leader of an organization, that you should stay in contact. And of course, an important part of leadership, it sounds very simplistic, is creating hope, positive reframing. That's what you have to do. And it's not always easy, but you have to positively reframe things because people are already depressed. You don't want to add to their depression, but you also have to be somewhat realistic. So it's a very delicate band.
It is. It's delicate, and I think we have to recognize that it's difficult for people. I wonder if Claire has another theme or a set of questions to bring in.
So I think one of the things that is coming through is that out of all this content and sort of ideas around reflection and sort of what an ideal leader might look like going forward, is there anything that we can sort of touch on now in terms of what you're seeing from the conversations you're having or the thinking that you're doing that we can take to work with either with our clients or as we reflect and sort of watch this situation evolve beyond sort of the 7 C's or saying that people should be more reflective, but actually sort of some of the more pragmatic steps that good leaders are taking versus some of the more reactive or retreating steps that bad leaders are taking?
I mean, Claire, an obvious one is, of course, scenario planning. That's what I very often do with my executives to have them spell out more clearly what would be a really dark scenario, to get that out of the way, to try to work that through. But also, looking at some more different scenarios. I mean, I think it's a good exercise to, for example, for a very pragmatic point of view, to look at 3 scenarios. One is the more optimistic scenario, which of course has to do with, in this case, also finding an antidote, because without an antidote, the world will still be somewhat on hold, in spite of the positive comments by my friend Trump. Then the most likely scenario, so people can look forward to something. And that I think, and then of course a pessimistic scenario, but it has to get out of the way, that you can talk about it. When you talk about it, it's so much better than holding it inside. You only get depressed, and you get mental health problems. So that's a very pragmatic way of thinking, and because you have to manage as a leader their anxiety, but at the same time you have your own anxiety. So in that respect, I feel that many people here on this call are also coaches, or maybe psychotherapists, that really reaching out to the people, your present clients and your old clients, to ask them about, and again coming back also to the altruistic motive, and also maybe sometimes expressing gratitude, but reaching out more than normal. It's a great opportunity. You do it normally, you send some Christmas card, and that's what you do, a New Year's card to keep in touch. But this is a much more important thing about how people deal with their anxiety and make it discussable. I mean, after all, I'm a psychoanalyst in my other world, and it is sometimes called the talking cure. I usually, as you know, also in coaching, the ability to express it, to talk about things, has a cathartic effect already. And that's partially of Liz made a lot of noise about what the clinical paradigm, which was basically a disguised statement about the psychodynamic systemic paradigm, that it basically means that we have to look on the surface, but what's different when I was making earlier comment about the Harvard Business School when I was there, the OB department was only interested in what's above the surface, but didn't have a clue about under the surface. And many consulting firms don't have a clue about that either. I mean, I spent many years trying to help McKinsey to get a better sense what's happening under the surface. So to be a better Sherlock Holmes, realizing the whole issue of transferential relationship, realizing that you can say we can only look forward, but you can, when you look at leadership style, that the past has an impact on the present and the future, like it or not, but you don't have to repeat it. And that is one of the things. What might be good when you were 12 years old is not good when you're 40. So, you know, some people, the famous thing about beating a dead horse, you know, you better dismount, that instead of keeping beating this dead horse. And so those, and also an important part of the clinical paradigm, of course, is the emotional management. I mean, when I was studying organizational behavior, the word emotion was not used. I mean, still the kind of leftover of Frederick Taylor and the Economic Man and things like that. But now the way to use emotion management, and coming back to my 7 C's, care, and I mean, you know, the issue of care and compassion, and that's the reason, you know, how can we select as an electorate more well-adjusted leaders? How can we select in organizations well-adjusted leaders? Because psychopaths have a fantastic capacity to tell you what you want to hear. How can we detect them? Usually the people detect that the person is psychopathic are the ones who work for them, because they take all the credit. But you know, but they're very good in managing upward, all those particular things. And there, I think we have a whole toolkit. I mean, I don't like to necessarily use the word toolkit, to help people to make better decisions. And yeah, I blabber too much, so.
I think we can probably also say that what we're seeing now is a kind of a global experiment in possibly reversing the work-life balance equation, that we're all kind of very much immersed in life because so many of us are not able to physically go to work. And possibly as coaches or people working with executives, we can try to explore what's happening in this laboratory at home in our personal lives.
Very much so. Very much so.
Well, I think, Manfred, we want to slowly, Graham will have a few words at the end to wrap up, but you know, in a truly kind of talking, someone mentioned talking cure, but I wanted to invite you to give us some sort of maybe some words that are addressed more to the, you know, the children who we know, or the children who you have known, or the children inside of us. Is there something that you'd like to say that is directed to the true heart of us?
I'm not young enough to know everything. It's no, I mean, the general advice is coming back to what I said earlier, is make an effort to know yourself. It's the oldest statements, and Thales of Miletus in, I think, 400 years BC already said it was the most difficult thing in the world. Know thyself. And when I think about, I mean, I was asked some time ago to give a talk at my old university. My first university was in Holland, and I look at the cohort I had, and if I would be at that age, I was studying economics, if I would have had Psychology 101, and many of my colleagues had Psychology 101, they wouldn't have, you know, when you look at their life, you know, most people live lives of quiet desperation. They might have had another life, because particularly younger people have to make 2 important choices usually. One is partner, and as you know, we do a lousy job there when you look at the divorce rate. And the second one is career, and what would fit me best, what, you know, the kind of psychostructure I have would fit me best. And again, we do it. That's the reason so many people are MBAs at INSEAD, because they got burned. And if they would, and now, by the way, we have, I think in that respect, INSEAD itself is different. Because when I came there, and maybe still to some extent the case, but the left side of the brain, I always make the joke, the left side of the brain was overdeveloped. And I've tried to put it a little bit more in equilibrium. So coaching has become a big part of the scenery. And I think this is the really, when you look at the associates at KDVI, is really, they're really distinctive competence to help people have a better understanding of their capacities and make better choices. And one of my earliest books, which had some renommee, was called The Neurotic Organization. And I made there, which was apparently, it sounds not very trite, but I made the observation that there's a relationship between personality, leadership style, and corporate culture. And I was trying to make a dichotomy, probably because I was working at the time with Henry Mintzberg, who is great for design organizations. So I made a number of topologies, which probably I would revisit if that would be the case, although I get so bored when I write something. So that's, and so the power some of those people have, they should be quite aware of it and use it for the good. But we have all these vices, wasn't there? And one is, a big vice is greed, among others.
Yeah. Well, and the last word from me then will be, what happens to the whole when the cheese is gone?
I have an answer to that.
Oh, right. Yes. All right.
I'm not going to tell you at the moment.
No, that will be for the next session. So thank you, Manfred. I think with that, we'll thank you extremely much. A great deal. And of course, thank you to the audience and the multitude of questions that have come in. I'll hand over to Graham, who will close and give us an idea of what happens next.
So thank you, Liz, and thank you, Manfred, and thank you to the KDVI, of course, for creating this wonderful space where we can share this moment with Manfred. An incredibly stimulating session. I think what we've really, to sum this up in some way, we've learned not to seek messiahs and not to seek magicians, but to actually look for philosopher kings, that we have no control. And so we will have to learn to live with this ambiguity potentially for quite some time to come. That if we're going to really engage people in organizations, given that 60–70% of people are disengaged, we're going to have to create a sense of belonging and seek to connect. And that altruism is a route to mental health for all of us, and we can do that one person at a time. And I think Manfred kicked off this session by saying, see this as an opportunity, and it is an opportunity. And I would like to sort of reflect on his leadership in this, because as he says often, leaders are merchants of hope. He's given us hope that there is opportunity for all of us to do something with this space that we find ourselves in. So thank you for this, and thank you for creating this opportunity to talk and think, and I will certainly be sort of inspired and thinking about this for the rest of today and beyond. We will do a follow-up session. Manfred will do a follow-up session because there was more demand than supply, which is great. And so Manfred will do another session. And of course, we will have a series of sessions to follow this on a number of different themes, which will form a different structure. They won't be in the form of a Q&A, but actually will be more smaller and more reflective sessions where we will hold breakout groups and people can really get together 4 or 5 at a time and think things through and discuss, and then bring them back into a plenary for a further discussion. We look forward to hearing from you and having you all on a future call. We're going to be running these sessions at least once a week for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And again, thanks to all of you for participating from all parts of the world in all your different time zones. Have a great day, or get some sleep and continue to reflect. So thanks very much from KDVI, from Manfred, from Liz, did a great job as a questioner, and for all of you. Thanks.